to talk about making mixed reality trailers. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty of this, I just want to give you a really quick background on who I am and why I'm up in front of you guys talking today. So I'm from the middle of nowhere of Canada. There's a small town called Winnipeg. It's a very far away technologically from a place like San Francisco, so it's kind of neat to always come out here every now and then. So a bit of my backstory, I used to work in the visual effects industry for about 8 years on a whole bunch of really, really bad Hollywood movies. Maybe Chum Scrubber, it was kind of okay, but the rest of them, I wouldn't recommend watching them. So, I was working in this industry, and as anybody knows who has friends or family that work in the visual effects industry, it's really long hours, 80-hour days. If they could do it, they would, 80-hour weeks. And so I wanted to have a family and sort of get out. So I started looking at different options. And to make a really, really long story short, I met a bunch of really, really cool guys in Winnipeg. We made this indie game arcade cabinet, and I started making trailers for the games we were putting on that cabinet, and they started to go viral on the internet. 3 years later, now I make indie game trailers full-time as my job, so it's kind of crazy. So, long story short, that led to the creation of these two trailers for Job Simulator and Fantastic Contraption. And so this sort of happened around January of this year before the Vive launched. And we made the decision to kind of shoot both of these at the same time, which was the best and worst decision of my life because it was so much fun and so much work, but oh my God, it was so stressful. So before we look at these two trailers and what we did, I just want to talk really briefly about the sort of problem that VR has right now. And it has this massive communications problem. And it's really, really, really hard to tell people what it's like to be inside of VR. I didn't make these up. You can pay money for these stock photos from Shutterstock if you really want to. And this is kind of like what is this? And this is shaping public perception of what VR is, and it's obviously not any of this stuff, what the heck is with the phones? So let's just take a look at what people were doing initially when VR started to come out. And when the Oculus came out, the raw output of the Oculus was this dual fisheye view, and it's got chromatic aberration. There's 2 images on the screen for some reason, and this is the worst possible way to show what VR is, because that is not engaging, and it doesn't even make any sense to look at. And not only that, it's ugly, because it's got black, and it's just this horrible thing, and it's why would you even do that? And so then people started, okay, hey, we'll just take the raw output of the head mount display, and we'll start using that as first-person videos. And the problem with that is that your head is literally the worst camera in the world. Your head is always doing these little micro adjustments and micro movements, and your brain and eyeballs kind of cancel all that out when you're seeing it, but when you're looking at the raw 2D footage, it looks like this, and it's shaky, and you're not concentrating on anything because your eyes are darting all over the place. And I actually personally get motion sick watching footage like this, especially when it's at 60 frames a second. So the next bright idea people came up with is, hey, let's put a picture-in-picture of the guy's dirty room so you can see him doing this stuff, right? And it's oh man, nobody wants to see your dirty room, and that doesn't add anything engaging to this experience. So it's okay, these ideas, no, they're just not working so far. So you figure Sony, okay, they're coming out with, the Morpheus at the time, and maybe they've got tons of money behind them, they'll come up with a good idea. And I do kind of like what they're doing, and they do these kind of virtual head mount displays. And the neat thing about that is you can actually see the person's face, and you can see their eyes behind the head mount display. This adds a little bit more of a connection to the viewer, so you can see their emotion and all that kind of stuff. The problem with it is it's completely fake because you can't actually play the game without the head mount display on. So what they're doing in videos like this and all of their marketing material is just they shoot B-roll of a person with tracking markers all over their face, and then they paint them out in post-production and pay a company a bunch of money to put a CG head mount display on and track it, and then they just intercut that in between footage. And the problem with that is it comes off as not being genuine, and people really sense that right away. They can tell, they're just going, yeah, whoa, or whatever, and they're just cutting that footage in. That just doesn't really feel right. So when it came time to do these two trailers, we sort of looked at the landscape and what was out there, and we decided, okay, what are we going to try to fix, and what are we going to try to do to make this better? So the first thing we're going to look at here is the trailer for Job Simulator, which has a little bit of mixed reality in it, and then we're going to look at the Fantastic Contraption trailer.
Hello, human. Welcome to an accurate simulation of office worker. Time to job. This looks like it'll taste interesting. Delicious.
Oh no, the boss bot is coming. Hey, you've been doing a
Good job. Looks like I've got some money to blow. Shred everything for legal reasons.
Today's not your lucky day, pal. Open that safe.
Holy smokes, this is way too hot. You've been doing a really good job lately. I think it's about time you got a promotion.
Hooray! It's 5 o'clock. Woohoo! It's time to go home.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to ask you to come in on Saturday.
Alrighty, so next one we're going to look at here is the trailer for Fantastic Contraption.
Fantastic Contraption is a game about building and using your creativity. The challenge of the game is simple. You have to get the pink ball to the pink goal. And to do that, you have to build a fantastic contraption.
All right. So, why shoot a mixed reality trailer? Well, I just think it's the best way to convey what it's actually like to be in virtual reality on a 2D screen. And I'm not the only person that thinks this. Even Valve, when they released the Vive, they did their own sort of mixed reality trailer. And they had the same sort of setup. They had a bunch of people on the couch, kind of like watching people play the game, because when you're playing VR with friends, it's actually like a really, really social thing. And so tons of other people are starting to do this now too. Like everybody's probably seen the amazing Google Tilt Brush trailer that came out like a couple months back now. The way they did theirs is slightly different than what we did. Theirs is more of like a post-visual effects kind of workflow as opposed to doing it live, which is what we did. But the end result is basically the same. And this is just like last Saturday, Marvel and Google collaborated on this crazy like Tilt Brush mixed reality trailer thing for the new Doctor Strange movie. And theirs is super, super good. It looks really awesome. And people are even doing this live. This is at Tokyo Game Show a couple weeks back. And the one thing I want to point about this is you notice the woman that's playing, she's in costume and she's doing like these really, really flourished moves, and she's actually performing the game. She's not playing the game. And that's a really, really big distinction we're going to kind of talk about here. Because when you're making a mixed reality trailer, you're no longer just capturing gameplay footage, you are actually performing your game. And the performance of the player that's in there really, really matters and creates a more engaging experience. So, not to like knock on these guys at all, but this is the guys that did Blasters of the Universe, and this is a mixed reality video that they created for their game. And technically, all the pieces are there. You know, it's mixed reality. He's in the room with the stuff, but it doesn't feel as engaging as all the other examples we've kind of looked at. The camera is really shaky. There's poor compositing. You're always looking at the person's butt for some reason. And the main thing is this game's really fun to play, but he's not really engaged. He's just kind of standing there doing his thing. So we're going to kind of look at some of these and how we resolve them. And finally, I just wanted to show this real quick. Someone did this like Bob Ross, The Joy of Painting inside of Tilt Brush. It's like a 3-minute video. You got to see it. It's really, really good. So For Fantastic Contraption, what we did is we used 3 sort of different techniques to kind of convey what it's like to be inside of VR. And the main one basically, is we composited the player into the virtual environment, and this is everything that we would shoot on a green screen. The second thing we did is we brought some of the virtual environment into the physical world, so like you could actually see him building the stuff inside the living room where he was playing. And third, we sort of shot an in-game avatar with a camera move that was like a real camera move in the real world. And this one I'm actually really, really excited about because you can do some really interesting things with it. Way back in the day, like when Avatar was being made, they would do these like large virtual sets, and James Cameron would have this like camera rig on his shoulder, and it would basically be something like this. But it would be like this, 6-figure kind of like, setup in order to get this sort of thing going and do virtual cinematography. Now we can literally do it with a $5 ghetto Steadicam and a $150 Vive controller in my basement. So it's a pretty cool democratization of that kind of technology. So to kind of just give you a quick background on how this whole thing kind of came to be, the Northways were profiled by Unity. This was, I think, like last December, almost a year ago at this point. And Colin kind of came up with the idea of like, hey, let's just take a third Vive controller, duct tape it on top of a DSLR, and we will align, we will in Unity say, hey, we're going to put a third camera where this Vive controller is and align the field of view and the position and the rotation offsets, and we'll just overlay the footage and see what happens. And so they did that, and they released this video online, and everyone freaked out, and especially me. And so I was like emailing Colin and emailing Andy and be like, how the heck did you guys do this? This is amazing. And then when they contacted me in January, it was like, okay, how do we do this, but then do it right and do it better? So the trick is basically that. You take, this is like obviously not the final rig we used, but it just sort of shows you we're sort of playing around with things. And so we're using like a DK1 controller, and you kind of just put it on top of your camera. And then what Colin did is he built me this user interface inside of the game. And what it would do is it would allow me to offset the position of the virtual camera in XYZ and XYZ rotation, and it would allow me to offset the camera FOV as well. And so you basically like, just, I don't have a ton of time to get into the technical details, but you noodle it to death, and then once you kind of get it, magic happens. So you can kind of see here that the controllers aren't perfectly aligned, but it's close enough. So the first test I did in my basement, I was like, it's close enough, I gotta try it, it's gonna be really great. So I just sort of go down there, you put on the head mount display, and I have to do this sort of calibration with my hands, moving them up and down, and that's to kind of align the footage in post. And then you kind of move stuff around, and it's like, wow, you can actually see yourself interacting with this stuff. And this is just with the foreground, 50% opacity here. So I was like, okay, this is great, and then I gotta move the camera, let's see what happens. So we started moving the camera around, and we start to figure out all the problems that we're gonna need to solve to do this right. So this is just using the gear that I had at home, like my ghetto Steadicam, and you can see the gameplay is shaking, and it's because it wasn't anchored hard enough. And you can tell my field of view is not wide enough, like I want to be able to see more of the environment that's around here, right? And you can also sort of tell that, like my friend Vince is playing the game here, but it's not engaging footage again. So it's sort of like you have to kind of choreograph what you're going to be shooting and what you're going to be doing, because you can't just sort of say, yeah, just play and we'll just record a bunch of stuff and hopefully you get something. It has to be a little bit more structured than that, especially when you go on set and where time is money. So, the footage is shaky, he's missing shortcuts there, and it's just not super fun to watch right now. So we're just trying to figure out all these different things. So in the end, what we ended up shooting with is a really nice high-end camera. It's a Sony a7S II on a Movi Steadicam, and the Steadicam is like basically one of the big pieces of the puzzle here, and it just smooths out all the movement. And we got a nice, really big wide lens, and there's just a bunch of really nice things going on here. And so once we had all those pieces together, this is kind of the final test that we shot before we went to shoot it on the green screen. And this is by far the most popular thing I've ever tweeted in my life. I sort of put this on before everybody was really doing a lot of mixed reality stuff, and people kind of went nuts, and they were just like, oh my God, this is so crazy, this is awesome. And I was just like, I can't wait to shoot this on the green screen. So for anybody that's ever been on set, basically, like time is money, and being on set, it's time to like execute. You don't really have a lot of time for experimentation, so everything kind of has to go right. So we just planned everything out, down to sort of like the hour. Okay, we got like this many minutes to shoot this many shots, and we just kind of went through everything. And this is the first take, and it kind of just gives you a really rough overview of like, this is what a rough take looks like. So here, we'll just watch this.
Camera's rolling.
Camera's rolling. Gameplay is rolling. Slate 1. Good. Controller calibration. Oh. You couldn't see the slate. Okay, controllers off and action. So that little checklist that I kind of like was talking through there, we literally had to do that for every single take in order to keep things aligned and keep things like flowing properly, because there's just so many little technical things you have to worry about for every single take. So this is basically what you get. The light stands are in there, so there's definitely post involved. There's rotoscoping involved, and the key here is not very good. There's no light wrap, there's no color correction. It's all very, very rough. So all those things that happen in post really help smooth this thing over and make it look really nice. So to give you a rough idea of just like how we're actually doing this is kind of like a breakdown of all the different layers. So this is what the camera shoots, obviously. This is Colin playing on green screen. And he divides the screen into different areas, and I'll show you that in a second. And basically, this is the foreground, which is on blue, so you can just kind of pop and key that out, and you put that in the foreground. Then he has a background layer, and you just kind of smush them all together, and you do a bunch of color correction and nice compositing tricks to kind of make it all look nice. And to kind of just, give you a rough idea, you just do that like hundreds of times, And this is me working in After Effects. And I think we had about like 90-ish shots on the green screen and sort of like 30 in the home. And literally it was just me sitting in front of After Effects, lining all these up. And then once you have they're doing all the rotoscoping on all the parts that are overlapping there. And you kind of just do this until you get all the different pieces, and then you start editing into something coherent. So it's a lot of work to get this all to look right. So to give you an idea of what the output looks like out of Unity, this is what Colin had built. And he sort of did this before. It was kind of like built into Steam VR in a way, but we'll talk about that in a second. So basically we have 4 quadrants. And so this is what you would see on your computer monitor. And we were just capturing the raw output of the computer monitor using Bandicam, which is like a $20 piece of software. And so we would put the upper right-hand corner as the foreground. And the way the foreground was defined is really interesting. So basically if the cameraman is standing in front of me there, anything between the head mount display and that camera gets put into that foreground view. Then in the upper left-hand view is the background, and the lower left is a composited view of the top 2 views there. And the lower right here is a smooth head mount camera display view. So basically it's like the head mount display but smooth, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's kind of how you did it, and you basically, in After Effects, you chop all those up into their individual layers, and then you kind of composite them all together. Now what's really, really neat is Steam VR, basically if you build your game with Unity, you kind of get this kind of free mixed reality mode. Now it's not as good as what Colin built, but it's good enough for a lot of purposes. And so the way theirs works is a little bit different. In the upper right, you have basically a foreground alpha view. In the upper left, you have foreground. And then lower left is the same sort of composite view. And lower right is head mount display. It's just sitting there because I had no friend at home to help me play and capture that piece of footage. But it's essentially the same sort of idea. And what you do is, it's sort of a technical thing. You divide the foreground by the alpha, and then you post-multiply that on top of the background, and you put your green screen in the middle. Now, the problem with this is the method that they're using is kind of like a brute force way to kind of get the foreground separated from the background. They're using a Z clipping method, and that's why there's that big line right in the middle. It's sort of like that's the clipping plane where it's separating what's going to be in your foreground and background. And the problem is when you're trying to composite this or do it live, you end up with like this seam in the middle, and if you're not really familiar with how to composite things properly, the color can be a little bit off, and it looks a little bit weird. But there are ways in post of fixing that to an extent if you really want to try to go at it. So the next kind of like interesting thing that's come up is the guys at Alchemy Labs have developed this crazy method of doing mixed reality with a stereo depth camera. And so this, reaching over top of that filing cabinet, is amazing. This is like a holy crap moment, right? What they're doing is real-time per pixel depth sorting composited inside of Unity. And so just to kind of like wrap your head around this, there's no After Effects involved here at all. What they're doing is they're taking a feed from this stereo depth camera, and what it does is it basically can calculate, the depth from where your hand is to where your body is, and it will take that depth information, composite it into your 3D geometry properly inside of Unity in real time at 30 frames a second. And on top of that, they can use like in-game lighting now to like affect the player. So when she, in the next little clip here, she unplugs the light, that's not done in post. That's actually done real time inside of Unity because the lights affect her because she exists inside of Unity. Now, the tech behind making all this happen kind of makes me feel like this guy. It's like this brain melting, just like mind exploding thing, right? There's a lot of stuff going on here, and it's really, really amazing. And for like 95% of people, this is going to be great. Like basically, there's nothing to do, really. You get per pixel depth sorting. You don't have to do any rotoscoping. There's no seams. All your compositing is done. There's no compositing in post. The in-game lighting affects the player. It's awesome. The not so amazing thing is, you're using a stereo depth camera, so you're only going to get a certain amount of precision from the depth of that person that's in there. And the Z stereo camera, it doesn't have as good of a sensor as, say, like a DSLR like we were using. Like just for a comparison, the DSLR we were using, I think was like a $2,000 body or $3,000 body. This is a $500 camera with all this built in. So you're just not going to get the same sort of like high dynamic range and all that kind of stuff. And the compositing that you're doing inside of Unity is never Boop. Oh, there we go. It's never going to be as good as what you could do in post-production, where you can do like really nice light wrap, and you can do really nice sort of like edge keying and stuff like that. And it's just doing it inside of Unity is a little bit of a rougher way to doing it. And the main thing is right now nobody can use it because they're still working on it. So hopefully down the line this will be democratized and everybody can do this. And I mean, for streamers and people doing this stuff on YouTube that don't need such a high level of production quality, it's going to be an amazing, amazing tool. So since the rest of us are kind of just like sitting here right now, just like, oh, what do? We need to kind of do something. A lot of people are going to default to this first-person footage. And I just want to talk about that really, really briefly, because capturing first-person footage is incredibly hard. You think that this would be an easy thing, but it's really, really not. And the you need to do is you need to have some sort of camera smoothing applied to your head mount display. And basically you're not using the raw output, you're taking that position and you're kind of smoothing it out over time, and you have to develop some sort of algorithm to do that. And that just kind of eliminates a lot of the judder that's happening, and it just gets canceled out and makes your footage seem a little bit more smooth. And it's really, really nice. And the thing that I never really thought is stuff that feels really natural inside of the head mount display can feel awful on a 2D screen. If you're gonna go like this and tilt your head from side to side, feels great when you're inside of there, but watching the footage on your monitor, it makes you feel like you're gonna puke a little bit. Head tilt is awful. So what we quickly realized is we actually need two people to record first-person footage. We need someone in the game, and then you need someone watching the computer directing that person who's playing. And you need to constantly remind them of stuff. You need to be like, hey, if you want your hands actually in the shot, they can't be by your waist, because that actually isn't in the field of view of the head mount display. You have to hold your hands up like in this T-Rex pose like this. And so you're walking around and they're like, don't tilt your head, do this stuff, like walk around like this, and it's really, really actually physically intensive to do. So there's this one shot in the Job Simulator trailer where you're being held up by this dude with a banana, and you'd figure, this is an easy thing. We spent about 45 minutes trying to capture this shot because there's literally dozens of ways that you can be held up with a guy with a banana, right? So we kind of tried different things. It's like you hold your hands up like this, you shake them, and it's like, if you move your hands back too far, they get out of the field of view of the shot. And then it's like, okay, well, let's try walking backwards, and then I'm bumping into my wall in the basement. And so there's all sorts of weird like physical limitations and physical things that come into play. And the main thing I want to sort of hit home with this is that it's a performance, and like the performance of what you're doing comes across in that footage, how fast you're shaking your hands, where you're physically looking, what your body language is, even to an extent, comes across in first-person footage. So you really have to take all these things into account, and it's not just sitting there banging out footage, it's you're acting, and you are acting out these moments. So since we have some time here, I'm going to talk about one other little thing, and this is something that I didn't expect either. And we captured a lot of B-roll, basically, of people on the couch, watching people play the game. And I wanted to just have this because Fantastic Contraption is a very, very sort of a social game to play. And the weird thing here, I'll just kind of play this footage. This is them just playing. I'm just like, just play, just have fun. And this is like a lot of their first time playing the game. Oh, do we have audio here? Yeah, okay. And basically, like, the reactions came across as very, very ungenuine. It's just like they're having too much fun, And I put a lot of this stuff in the first cut of the trailer, and Colin was like, the acting is like not so good. And I was like, well, they're not really acting. This is their genuine emotion because they were excited to try VR for the first time. And it just, I don't know what it is, but like if anyone's seen like the Wii Fit commercials or things like that, or like the old Wii commercials where the family's sitting around the couch playing the game, they just come across as sort of eerily creepy, even if it's completely genuine. And I really didn't expect that, so we had to cut a lot of that stuff out of the trailer. So to kind of wrap things up here, I just want to talk about a few problems and hopes for the future. And one of the things that we encountered on set when we were shooting is sort of like loss of tracking. Because when you're playing the Vive by yourself in your tracking area, there's only one body in there, right? And so the lighthouses are pretty much full view of everything. As soon as you throw a cameraman into that sort of environment, now you're dealing with like obstruction, and you're dealing with like occlusion in certain situations. Like we had problems where if the cameraman was like in between the player, which is me here, and the lighthouse, which is there, and he was standing up, it would block the field of view of the lighthouse, and we would lose tracking. And this happened in a lot of situations, but we sort of like figured out where you can and can't be on set, and then we kind of shot around that. So eventually, I hope we just get 360-degree tracking. We can just forget about that problem altogether. The second thing is we need a dedicated tracking object for cameras, and this would be basically something better than duct taping a Vive controller on top of your DSLR. I hope this is coming down the line. Now that Valve has like open sourced the whole tracking technology, I'm sure that this is going to come sooner rather than later. The next thing that I want to do is have more cameras in there so you can have more cameramen. And then you start thinking about, wow, if we could have like 2 cameramen, you could do a close-up, you could do a wide, you could even, if you got the tech down right, you could do zooms and stuff. And you can shoot like almost like a live TV show inside of virtual reality with like multiple cameras, or you could do like esports stuff. And there's all sorts of interesting things that kind of open up there. So the next thing is sort of like a unified camera calibration system from Valve. That would be amazing if they would do it. Somebody else could do it too. But basically, the process of calibrating your DSLR and your virtual controller, it's really, really hard right now, especially for people that aren't familiar with cameras and how they work. Figuring out the offsets and the FOV and how how it all works together is really, really tough. So some sort of like optical like image recognition kind of technology where you just wave your Vive around, wand around, and it just kind of fixes it. That would be amazing, but that doesn't exist right now. And the other thing is it would be awesome if in like the stock like Steam VR plugin there was better options for developers. Specifically head-mount display smoothing, if that was just like in there across the board, that would just help everybody, because then everybody would have to write that from scratch, and the raw footage that people are releasing like right out of their game would just look that much better. So that's kind of it. And I have a question. Okay, we have like 5 minutes for questions here. I've got like a 5-minute video I could show, or does people want to do a Q&A for 5 minutes? How many people have questions? We got like one question. How many people want to watch a video? All right, let's do it. You can come to me later. We are working on the Job Simulator and Fantastic Contraption trailers right now. They're the 2 of the 3 launch games that are coming out with the Vive. So when they approached me, I was really, really excited about it. I mean, I just really wanted to be on board with this kind of thing. My background is in visual effects, and I used to work on like a whole bunch of different Hollywood movies. After I got out of the visual effects industry, I sort of transitioned into video games and started doing more motion graphics. But these 2 trailers are the first ones that really merge those skills in like a really, really nice way. So generally speaking, I'm literally a one-man shop in my basement making game trailers, but for this, I knew we would need a green screen studio, we'd need a camera crew, we'd need people on set, we'd need actors, and so all of a sudden your needs are just growing exponentially. So I called Handcraft, and they were like, yes, let's do this. And so then we started figuring, okay, what cameras are going to we shoot with? What are we going to use to stabilize the camera? We need to figure out which camera would actually fit in the stabilizers, and like, you know, how do we attach the third Vive controller to that? And will that throw the camera off? And blah, 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 blah. It just keeps mounting on top. Right? And we did that first test in the basement, and I put it on Twitter and it just exploded. People were like, whoa, oh my God, this is crazy. And so we knew we were onto something.
So today here we're recording VR trailers, which is kind of this new thing that people haven't had to think about before. And we're doing that with a green screen and doing some mixed reality stuff where we can kind of superimpose people into the actual game with a hope of being able to explain to people what VR is like. Actually showing people inside VR for the first time, that's really, really magical, and I think will kind of allow people to understand without trying it just a little bit of what this stuff is going to be like. Job Simulator is a game coming out for all 3 VR platforms, the Vive, the Oculus with the Touch, and PlayStation VR. It's a game where robots have taken over all jobs. It's the year 2050, and so they created the simulator to simulate what jobs used to be like, so these future humans could experience what it was like to job.
Fantastic Contraption is a video game for VR where you use your hands and you walk around and you make a contraption. So you make a machine. You use these simple tools, you use just wheels and sticks, and you basically try to get from over here to over there.
Basically, every single time we would do a take on set, there was like this checklist of things that we would need to go through. So like the first thing we would do is make sure that the camera is rolling, and then make sure that I'm capturing gameplay on the computer. And we would have to get people to do a calibration of their hands with the controllers visible. And the reason we needed to do that is we needed some way to align the footage from the gameplay and the camera in post-production. So the screen would be split up into a foreground layer, a background layer, a composited layer, and then what the player was actually seeing through the head-mount display. So we're capturing all 4 of these views live at the exact same time as they were playing.
It was awesome. Kurt's crazy. As soon as we had our first Skype call with Kurt and he was telling us all his ideas, I was like, that's impossible. And after we saw the first few of his screen tests, it was pretty mind-blowing.
People aren't going to realize how much work this was. It's like, oh, they shot it on green screen, it's all computer. But no, what we actually did is we shot the gameplay live. So the gameplay was actually being captured at the exact same time. We didn't go in Cinema 4D or Maya and rebuild all this stuff. So literally it took 2 days of doing rough composites of every single one of these shots and just layering everything in, lining them all up exactly on the right frame, and spitting that all out into this big collection of files. Then once you have that, you can actually start looking at it and sifting through the footage. It's really the best way to showcase virtual reality. It's the best way to show that that person is in that environment and manipulating those objects. And a lot of people, you just say you have to try it in order to experience it. And I think that these mixed reality videos are the best way that we can get that feeling across, in a 2D format without having the headset on. Being involved in the first of these kind of things is really, really fun. It's fun to work through all the technical problems, and it's fun to figure out how to shoot in VR and what things you need to do to make that look good. So it was stressful, but it was really exciting at the same time.
All right, thanks guys. Do you have time for questions, or am I out of time? I got no one telling me I'm out of time. Anybody want to ask a question? I'll talk until they kick me out.
Avatar in the game, especially when the actual game it doesn't support an avatar?
Well, yeah, even just doing the head mount, a lot of games are just doing existing game and head mount. Does essentially. And that works really, really well. And people are kind of for Fantastic Contraption, they built this little rough, sort of blobby-ish kind of body. It doesn't have any IK on it, and personally, I like that way better because it's kind of abstracted from the body, which looks janky. So there's all sorts of different things you can do. I mean, it can literally just be the visor and the hands, or you can start to go up from there. But whatever you do, it has to match with the style of your game, so it feels like that's actually part of it, and not just a default, asset store kind of thing floating in space.
Right. So would you actually take that track data into some other DCC and then construct something separate and then layer it in?
Well, you don't have to do it if you're doing it in-game. If you have an avatar in-game and you just want to show that, you just capture the footage. You just, capture the little third-person footage from the camera. There's no compositing or anything involved at all. It's actually the easiest and sort of lowest barrier to entry to do that stuff.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem.
Hey, great work. Question, have you thought of using the depth from the rendering so that you do in compositing have an easier way of basically deciding on where is the front and where is the back?
So you're talking about getting a Z-depth pass out of unit. Okay, this will be the last question.
Yes.
Yeah, so a Z-depth pass. Well, the problem with that is you're just adding more overhead, and you'd have to dedicate a quad or another computer to outputting that pass, right? So in theory, yeah, I think that's how the Google guys did theirs. They actually output a Z-depth pass so they could do post depth of field blurring. And but they did it sort of different. They rendered all these separate passes out of Unity full screen rather than doing it as a quad system like we did. And they could play back the gameplay every single time to get these passes. So yeah, that's definitely something you could do. It's just, you got to make it happen, make it work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks guys.